Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. I'm your host, Nick Bell, once again, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by my co-host, Paul McGarrahy. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing very well, Nick. It's good to see you as always. Good to speak to you. It's a good topic I think we've got for this episode as well.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed talking about Diego Forlan and Giuseppe Rossi last week. And some of the feedback I got on that, including from a couple of friends who listened to the podcast, was just that pure taste of, I completely forgot how good Diego Forlan was at Villarreal. But also, like, Giuseppe Rossi as well. It was you never really remember him. So again, hopefully with tonight's topic, we can reignite some passions and some thought-provoking memories from this one, because we're going to take a look at our first Copa del Rey final. We've not really done an episode like this before, but we thought we'd like to bring through. There's this period, isn't there, Paul, we're looking at? It's sort of like 1999 to 2009. And I suppose maybe you could explain to the people at home what's so significant about this period of Copa del Rey-ness.
Yeah, so it's a period where there's some people who may say that it perhaps shows that the Copa del Rey is a very underappreciated competition, and certainly was. It was, in a way, a little bit more unpredictable than La Liga was at the time, because pretty much every year for near enough 10 years straight, there was a different winner of the competition. And we want to dive into that, don't we? We want to explore it because there's clubs in this period of time who were winning either their first piece of silverware for a long time, in some cases their first piece of silverware ever, and in most cases their last piece of silverware for a long time. So there's a lot to go at there, and there's some phenomenal players. That some players as well, I think that maybe we forgot, just like Diego Forlan and Giuseppe Rossi, we forgot about how great they were as footballers, but also as entertainers on the pitch. And I think, it's a cup competition, isn't it? So it's always got there's an extra sort of edge to it. There's unpredictability. There's drama, and there's also a few quirks as well that you don't always get in the humdrum of a league campaign. So I think we're looking at something that has a lot of different avenues and clubs and topics for us to explore further on down the line. But tonight, I think we've picked one that certainly we'll enjoy talking about, and hopefully everyone will enjoy listening about as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think when people look at the Copa del Rey now and sort of not what it stands for, but what it does. For example, now all the finals seem to be played at La Cartuja, which is just this. To be fair, last time I saw it out in the last Copa del Rey final between Barcelona and Real Madrid, it looked better than it had done in a few years, but it's still quite a dour stadium on the outskirts of Seville. Whereas the period that we're looking at here, you're playing at the Vicente Calderón, you're playing at the Bernabeu. You've got some really quirky stadiums that are hosting final games, which is really nice. But I suppose, like what I've just said there as well, the last sort of maybe like 10 to 15 years is going to say the Copa del Rey has been dominated by one of three teams essentially. There's only been, I think, three sides that have won it that aren't Barcelona, Real Madrid, or Atletico Madrid. So, it's nice, as you said, Paul, to focus on this area where we had such a variation of teams winning it, but such a variation of finals as well. It's not just those teams overcoming the odds to beat one of those top three. They're playing other sides who are getting there and meriting with some, really fantastic results to go with it, which I think is why we've started on this one. So we're not going to go in chronological order. We want to do it in terms of what we think are the funnest ones. So the first one is the 2006 Copa del Rey final between Espanyol and Real Zaragoza, which, to think now that was a Copa del Rey final, given where both of these clubs are in the La Liga system at the moment, you'd be hard pressed to think that this would be a fixture that'd pop up again in a Copa del Rey final anytime soon, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we'll get into it as well, the respective journeys of the clubs to the final as well is as interesting as the final it was as was. And like you forget. So obviously, this is the early 2000s. We're talking a period of time where Real Madrid still had Beckham, Ronaldo, Gravison. Remember him? CS, Ramos, Robinho, and Barcelona obviously were. So 2006, we're talking Ronaldinho. I mean, it's the right, and the fantastic team that they had there, and a young Argentinian guy who went on to have a half decent career as well.
Javier Saviola, was he at Barcelona?
Yeah. And you think about all of those players that those two teams alone had in their ranks, but there's also some pretty decent players in the two finalists this season as well. Some names that I think for a couple of maybe the younger listeners as well, they might be surprised that such and such a body played for Real Zaragoza, or such and somebody was still at Espanyol at that time in their career and things. But it's a period of time where I would say that football, or modern football, was in a kind of stage of development that I really started to appreciate the game even more than I already did, because it had the flair. We'd been through the late 90s, early 2000s Yogo Benito era, which we've covered previously. But it also had a bit of dynamism to it. It's still, VAR wasn't even a glint in someone's eye at that point in time. Football was still a bit pure. The stadiums were usually rocking, and there was an intensity. Revista de la Liga was on Sky. It was a good era that we're getting into. Football on and off the pitch was exciting. So yeah, let's get stuck in.
I think that's it. This is where we start to maybe see the influx of footballers coming from La Liga as well into the UK, which is probably why we have an appreciation of it. Like we've already spoken about Rafa Benitez coming to Liverpool around this time as well, and winning the Champions League in 2005. So again, you're starting to see these little nuances where we go, actually, yeah, that player and that player was really, really good. So and again, as I've mentioned, these two teams you would not expect to be in a final, but they deserve to be there on merit. Probably one more than the other. So I'll start with Espanyol's run through to the final as well. Paul, obviously they joined in the round of 16. So again, I think depending where you finish in the pyramid means you get buys through certain rounds. So I think at the time, Espanyol, we're very much in their, I don't want to say prime, because I think the Bielsa Espanyol side was just a little bit better than this one. But they were still, regularly, finishing mid-table to top of the table in La Liga. That's why they got to join in the round of 16.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. This is a time perhaps where more so certainly than in the last 10 years, Espanyol could compete with Barcelona. There was more spice to the derby, and it was probably a bit closer to call, even with Barcelona having Ronaldinho and co at the Camp Nou. There was, I think it was a bit more evenly matched than it is or has been for the last 10 years anyway.
Yeah, well, Espanyol had it like that, stars in their own right, which I'm sure we'll cover across when we look at those final teams and things like that. But it did feel like there was a more even spread of talent or of bigger names, I should say, across Spanish football at the time. I don't think you really get that now, and I can't really put my finger on why that is. if you used to look at Sevilla's side, for example, in isolation this season, I wouldn't be able to necessarily point out too many players that I would consider to be household names. Whereas back at this point in time, there would be one or two that you'd be easily able to go, yep, him. And it was the same with Espanyol and Real Zaragoza as well. But, for Espanyol to work its way through here, starting this round of 16 with a 4-3 win over 2 legs against Getafe, moving on to beat Cadiz 2-0 away and 2-0 at home as well in the quarterfinals, and then beating Deportivo La Coruña in the semi-final. Again, this is Depor not at its lowest ebb. This is Depor that has come back on the back of, winning a Copa del Rey themselves, winning the league title a few years earlier, and things like that as well. So again, not a weak side, but again, these are quite impressive wins for Espanyol, really, aren't they? To go away from home and get these victories was quite dramatic for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were no mugs, and you're right to go back to that point that this is an era where it was more evenly matched across the league table. So I mean, a good example of that is, spoiler, Espanyol win this final, but which I'm sure if you're listening to this, you already know because we're in the year 2025. So I hope nobody's waiting for the highlights to come on and been looking away from the telly for 19 years. But
waiting for this podcast.
Yeah.
Someone's talking
if you're getting your news from here, then there's something wrong with you. Yeah. So whilst they go on to obviously lift the Copa trophy, and they've got a pretty they've got a team with some excellent players in it. They actually finished 15th in the league in this campaign, narrowly avoiding relegation. They've been pretty inconsistent away from home in particular in La Liga, and they'd had a few injuries that disrupted the momentum. The team scored too few a goal, but conceded quite easily. And during the league campaign as well, there was quite a bit of, there was a few whispers of some internal disruptions during the course of the season. But the Copa was the Copa del Rey campaign was a completely different story. That it was. I mean, but you see this sometimes as well, don't you? You see some teams that have a terrible league campaign and then do fantastic in the cup. It happens even nowadays, and I think that's applicable in this sense for Espanyol. Like I say, finishing 15th, and it was very tight at the bottom end of the season there. But as you've covered the route to the final, particularly playing against a Depor team that Depor was still massive. I mean, they're still massive now, aren't they? They're just not in the league that they should be in our opinion. But this was 20 years ago, and they were doing all right back then. So it's not an easy route, but it's not as difficult as their opponents, shall we say?
Yeah, it was much more of a roller coaster for Real Zaragoza. I think one of the reasons why maybe I'm blanking out this season in La Liga, Paul, is because I've just looked at the table and Malaga finished bottom of the league. They were 12 points behind Cadiz, who finished in 19th and only won 5 games that season. So it's really not a great period for the club I support. But you're right, the Real Zaragoza one is really strange because they start in the third round. So again, just one round ahead of Espanyol. So they've had that extra game, but the first match is against Alicante. They draw 1-1 in that and they go to pens and they scrape through 6-5 on pens. Sudden death it goes to. And then again, the fourth round away in Jerez to begin with was another draw, this time 2-2. So again, I'm sure people who do listen to this podcast will understand the way the Copa del Rey works, but just to remind people who maybe don't, the side which is higher up in the pyramid, so for example, if they're in La Liga and against the Segunda side, the La Liga side's got to go away from home. So this is why all these sides have been away so far. And Jerez, he drew 2-2, but scraped through 6-7 on penalties or 7-6 on penalties. So again, 2 games there against assumingly lower league opposition for Real Zaragoza. And they're just squeaking through, aren't they? That's, probably not a good sign of what is going to come.
No. It's skin of the teeth. and that is arguably the tie against Jerez is their easiest. I mean, it's two-legged as well, isn't it? We should say that at this point in time the ties were two-legged, with the exception of the final. But yeah, Jerez was the easiest opponent that, on paper at least, that they would face during the course of the campaign.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, when you start to look at the bigger boys that are coming up again. So again, now we'd look at this, team Atletico Madrid in the round of 16 as like, oh, that's going to be a difficult tie. It was never easy to go away to the Vicente Calderon at any point, but at this moment in time, they weren't really at their, 10s to 20s pomp that we have under Simeone now. So they were beatable. So they probably weren't as hard to come across, and they did beat them 3-2 over the course of two legs. But getting that 1-0 win away at the Vicente Calderon, really, really setting a marker for them, given that they've drawn the last two games in the rounds. But then the biggest shock of all for me, well, maybe the first shock of many, is beating Barcelona. So again, you've already alluded to, this is the Barcelona that's got Ronaldinho in it. It's the Barcelona that has, I don't think they've signed Henry at this point, but they're about to sign Henry, but they've got Samuel Eto'o in the squad. Xavi's coming through, a young Iniesta's coming through. Ludovic Juli, if anyone remembers him, massive, wonderful player to sign a Football Manager. And they turn them over, and they turn them over in fashion as well. They beat them 4-2 in the first leg, and despite the fact they lost 2-1 in the second leg, win 5-4 in aggregate and earn themselves a semi-final against Real Madrid. But to turn Barcelona off in this fashion is, impressive enough, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the reward for beating Atleti was to have Barcelona, and then the reward for beating Barcelona is to play Real Madrid. I think it's the tough as routes to the final go in a given year. That to be paired against them three consecutively is pretty tough going. So I think I've got a lot of sympathy for Zaragoza for that run. And like you say, this is the Barcelona of of many a star who. They weren't just a very good team. They were also very good to watch as well. So there's being an underdog, and then there's being an underdog. I mean, as we'll get onto it though, it turns out that Zaragoza had some pretty decent players of their own as well, I'd say.
Yeah, they did. This was the year that Barcelona won the Champions League, isn't it? 2006, they beat Arsenal in Paris, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, this is the Arsenal final, isn't it?
Yeah. So again, the fact that Arsenal, probably not in their prime either, but they obviously did very well in the Champions League that season, got taken apart by Barcelona this game. The fact that Zaragoza could go do that to them in their own backyard was very very interesting. But as I've said, the reward for doing that was a semi-final against Real Madrid. And I tell you what, if you think beating Barcelona in the quarterfinals is one thing, winning the first leg 6-1 against Real Madrid is definitely I'm going to say probably has never happened again, and never will happen again, that Real Zaragoza could say we beat Real Madrid 6-1.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've got the team sheet here that Real Madrid had for that first leg. So it's a 4-1-4-1 formation with Casillas in goal, Salgado, Sergio Ramos. We've got Roberto Carlos on the other side. Algueda, Gravison, Beckham, Guti, Baptista, Robinho, and Ronaldo, the real Ronaldo. And the substitutes that they brought on, we're talking Pavon, Zidane, Cassano, and it's not a second string team that started that game either, is it? By any stretch of the imagination. And obviously, if you bring in Zidane on, that's not that you're taking the game lightly in any case, is it? But 6-1, first leg, you're thinking, wow, hey, what's this? And there's a picture.
Don't they?
Yeah, there's a picture. So I've got the Mundo Deportivo the match report up here, and it's just a picture of of David Beckham looking completely dismayed. And
Very
in the
despondent.
background, yeah, you can see the Zaragoza players celebrating. Yeah, this was it. It wasn't a fluke. You don't fluke your way to 6-1, do you?
Well, I looked at the same article as you did, so it's got the score line on it. Real Zaragoza 6, Real Madrid 1. And obviously in Spanish football newspapers, they always give a rating or like a star rating, things like that. Casillas 1 star, Salgado 1 star, Ramos 1 star, Ivan Helguera 1 star, Roberto Carlos 1 star, Gravison 1, Beckham 1, Guti 1, Baptista 1, Robinho 1, and Ronaldo 1. Even Zinedine Zidane, that who you would argue has never really put in a subpar performance, 1. This was seismic in terms of a result, and probably was one of the things that cost the manager his job in the end, because a couple of weeks ago we spoke about the Galacticos, and this is very much the era of change coming into the Roman Calderon era as well, and this was sort of a sign of what was to come, and the Galacticos really sort of losing their edge. But take nothing away from Real Zaragoza here, because they did exactly what they wanted to do. We've noted there that obviously this is a two-legged affair up until the final, so they had to go to the Santiago Bernabeu with a healthy result to basically get themselves through to the final. They did lose that second leg 4-0, but when you've won the first leg 6-1, who cares whether you lose 4-0? It was an absolute balmy semi-final setup, really. 11 goals across the two legs. It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And listen, losing 4-0 to Real Madrid at the Bernabeu is easily done, particularly in days where they had a team like they did. But look, the results all that matters. It's over two legs. They cruise through in what is probably probably one of the toughest routes to the final that you'll ever have as a club, particularly one of Zaragoza's size. Should we? I think before we go into the actual the final itself, it's probably worth listing some of the key players from the respective teams. Do you think should we do that?
Yeah, let's have a little dive down that particular avenue. So, who do you want to start with? Do you want to go with? I'm going to argue that there's probably. Do you know what? I think it's quite even in terms of the names we'd like to pick out. Should we start with Espanyol? Because I think there's one player that you definitely will talk about inside Espanyol.
Yeah. If we go with Espanyol first, then if we read the starting 11 for the final,
Yes.
as if it's breaking news on this.
Go full Mike West for us.
So in goal was Carlos Kameni, or Kamini as some people used to pronounce it. Then you had Pablo Zabaleta, wearing the number 8 shirt, which is pretty curious for a fullback. Defense as well was Alberto Lopo, Daniel Harke, David Garcia, and then in midfield you had Ito, Eduardo Costa, Fredson, Ivan de la Peña, and then the two up front was Luis Garcia and Raul Tamudo as the captain. And there's some good names in there, aren't there? There's some.
I think it's a good blend of players in that squad that you just like to reminisce on. So, Carlos Kameni, for most people remember, I certainly remember from his time at Malaga, but he was a goalkeeper that was constantly linked with a move to the Premier League, whether it was through Liverpool or whether it was to Manchester United or Arsenal and places like that. He was a very well revered, I want to say Cameroonian goalkeeper.
Yeah.
So, very, very high level. Obviously, we don't need to mention Pablo Zabaleta too much. I think he went on and had a okay career after leaving Espanyol. But, again, you didn't get signed by Manchester City at that period of time if you didn't have something about you, did you, Paul? He's obviously a very good footballer.
Yeah, it was an upgrade on Vedran Chorluka, who we had at the season prior. And he did all right for silverware, didn't he? But I mean, as well, we're talking about the starting 11, and we'll come to some of the names that are on the bench as well, because there's at least 3 that jump out for me. But Luis Garcia and Raul Tamudo up front, maestro and an icon really in Tamudo, who, captain, very loyal, led. But I thought he always kind of like conducted himself pretty well. I thought, and just he had a bit of a calmness about him, a bit of class. Quite a talisman as well, I'd say. And then Luis Garcia, who quite a versatile player, moments of magic as well. It's not a bad starting 11, and we've got to mention the subs. So, do you want me to list them all, or should we just list the ones that end up coming off the bench?
I think go for those ones that you want to talk about. I think obviously one of them was quite vital in the final, but there's 2 or 3 there that we think that they're definitely warranting a mention, and one in particular I would say, because this was his sort of like return to Espanyol.
Yeah. Well, you've got a young-ish Juan Fran.
Formerly of Kelme Club de Football, may I add?
Yes, yeah.
I never failed to mention that.
You've got Walter Pandiani, who scored some pretty important goals in his career, Uruguayan. Some people might remember Armando Sarr as well, and Moises Hurtado and Coro. And then Maurizio Pochettino as well. Unused sub in the final, as it happens.
Yeah, this was this was a return to the club for him, wasn't it? Like, we spoke about this in our Argentine episode, but obviously he'd left. He'd won the Copa del Rey under Marcelo Bielsa with Espanyol in 2001, I'm going to say. Basically, a couple of seasons after that, the club couldn't afford to keep him. He went to Paris Saint-Germain, and then he came back. Obviously, when he was a little bit older. He played a big part in this team, but I think the influence that he had, obviously, will go on to have at Espanyol as well, is definitely worth noting here. Walter Pandiani as well. He's just a natural striker for anybody. I think whatever club he turned up at in Spain, whether it was Deportivo de La Coruña, whether it was he was at Mallorca as well, wasn't he, for a little while, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, had a spell there. Yeah.
Yeah, Espanyol, he just scored goals, and he was absolutely brilliant. So again, you look at that side and you just think, well, that's just a lot of fun. Raul Tamudo for me, 340 appearances for Espanyol. You'd never get that nowadays. What they'd give to have Raul Tamudo in their squad at the moment it isn't probably worth mentioning. Maybe if we just squeeze over to the Real Zaragoza side, because again, I really like this Real Zaragoza side. This was Real Zaragoza as they were starting to get going, weren't they? They went on to sign some pretty impressive players after this, but this club from Aragon, it wasn't as well known as, say, some of the other squads inside the Liga, but at some point they just had some absolute world beaters in there. The 2 that I'm going to pick out really as my favourites here are the Milito brothers. Obviously, both came across from Argentina at the same time, from separate clubs, if I remember rightly, as well. I think one of them was at Racing, and the other one was at Rosales or someone like that. But the fact that they were here together and making a name for themselves, and becoming fully fledged Argentine internationals as well, is really, really interesting. And then Ueton as well was, this really exciting Brazilian winger. And I think the way that they played as well, Real Zaragoza, was a bit ahead of the times, really, because they never really had a central striker, did they? They had 2 strikers up top that loved to just wander out wide.
They were quite a roaming forwards, weren't they? Yeah. It's there was a dynamism there. Actually, you're right. It had a distinctive style compared to some of the other teams in La Liga of the era. I think you've got to mention Albert Salades, who has gone on to have a few managerial jobs since, hasn't he? Was he at Valencia last, or is there another job since then?
Yes, he was back in 2020. He's also been the assistant manager for Real Madrid and for the Spain national side as well. So
yeah, and Canny as well in midfield, who was the Zaragoza captain. I think he ended up Villarreal as well. I don't think we mentioned him last week.
yeah, he's the local boy there, wasn't he, for Real Zaragoza as well? So he came through their youth system. He was a graduate of the Real Zaragoza Cantera. He went away to Villarreal and had a very lengthy career playing under Manuel Pellegrini, amongst others as well. Making I think the best part of over 250 appearances for Villarreal, but did come back to the home patch eventually. Though I'm surprised he's never been in the sort of management picture. The way Real Zaragoza recently been employing their managers, they've always seemed to want to pick up on a bit of a hometown boy, like I've said, and he's never really come across the card yet. So it's quite interesting to see whether that might pop up. He's still obviously very, very young, but yeah, he was a workhorse in there, wasn't he? And a real powerhouse for Real Zaragoza too.
Yeah, absolutely. He was more technical as well than I think perhaps he got credit for at the time. But he was had a lot of energy and very clever with and without the ball.
He was in an era as well where that particular role that he was playing, there were so many good players in Spain doing that at the same time as well that he probably got slightly, I don't want to say forgotten, because some people will recognize, but when you've got players like Aymar and Juan Roman Riquelme and Ludovic Julie, for example, as I've previously mentioned, all doing similar roles and excelling at them, then it's probably hard to recognize and notice. But you cannot take anything away from Canny and his influence on that team, and obviously then what he went to do when I think he eventually replaced Juan Roman Riquelme at Villarreal as well, if I remember rightly. But yeah, they're absolutely brilliant. And again, some of the players that they've got on their bench as well. You've got Raul Valbuena, who is the goalkeeper who came on to replace Cesar Sanchez, who got a red card in this final. Savio as well, really rapid Brazilian. So this is a final that is full of fun and lots of familiar faces, so to speak. The final itself is again really, really exciting, because you would think, coming in on the back of the results that Real Zaragoza had, that they'd come in with an air of confidence to say, our name's already written on this bloody trophy. We've beaten Barcelona and Real Madrid emphatically. We're taking this home now. And it really didn't turn out to be the case. And it was, that man, Raul Tomudo, who scored within the 2 minutes that put the marker on Real Zaragoza, didn't they? In this game, they just couldn't lay a hand on Espanyol. Espanyol executed the game plan absolutely perfectly and came flying out the traps. 10 minutes later, they go 2-0 Luis Garcia from the penalty spot. And then just before half-time, Coro adds a third for Espanyol. And Zaragoza had just shell-shocked. Like, they couldn't believe what was happening, were they?
Yeah. And you see it, and heads start to go, as the saying goes. And you see that with, there was quite a few yellow cards anyway, but I think it all culminates and is best exemplified with the second yellow card for the goalkeeper, who, people may be able to, or perhaps have watched it, the highlights back recently, but I still can't get over it, I suppose, really, for Cesar Sanchez to throw a bottle into the crowd out of his frustration. And to be fair, we've talked about this before, about how in this particular era, the atmosphere at games was probably a little bit better than it is now. It definitely was a lot better than it is now. It was intense. The fans are right on top of you. And he's already on the yellow. He got booked just before half-time, but 74th minute, he's had enough. It's moments after the third goal goes in. I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he picks up a bottle and throws it into the crowd. Referee comes over. Unsportsmanlike behaviour, I suppose, is what you'd have to deem it. Second yellow, and off he goes. And
it's a massive head's gone, isn't it? Like,
it is.
I think that is it at that point, and I think you look at some of the reactions from the players. in the Real Zaragoza team, and you know, shell shock's the word I use, but I think they're absolutely bereft of ideas to think, well, how the hell can we lay a glove on Espanyol here? You know, Espanyol, who have had the easier run up to the final, like you say, they've not shown that they've been, you know, particularly competitive in the league that season either. You know, so the fact that they managed to come here and win so convincingly, eventually winning 4-1 on the night, you know, was absolutely formidable. You know, even the La Peña scores the fourth goal, and it takes until stoppage time, I think it is, for Iwerton to get his the goal back for El Zagreb. But at which point the game's over. Espanyol are lifting the cup.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, De La Peña, I think he might even be the one who plays the pass through for the third goal, for the third Espanyol goal, that he just threads it through. I think it's Garcia who's coming back from an offside position, but it was quick and it was sharp passing, but all through the game. So you had De La Peña, like I say, a bit of a midfield maestro, really, throughout the entire Copa del Rey campaign. Actually, I think he got 4 assists, but then, and this is probably where it gets quite interesting, and we've talked about how, you know, Zaragoza had the toughest run. They've got the 2 highest scorers in the Copa del Rey in their team for this final. There are 14 goals between them. And in terms of the Copa del Rey as a competition, Espanyol's highest scorer in the competition that season was Luis Garcia with 3, and obviously he's getting one of them 3 in the 2 of them 3 in the final. So, you know, it was a real shock, I suppose, on paper. But Espanyol, if you watch it back, there's no fluky goals. I mean, the first goal comes in that scored in a matter of moments. It's a brilliant free kick that hits the woodwork and then is placed in with a header. But the passing and the movement in midfield, and it was just the link between De La Peña, Garcia, and Temudo throughout the match. If you watch it back, is just fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think Temudo, especially in this, you could see, you know, obviously he's a legend for Espanyol at the time anyway, given his longevity and his loyalty, as we've alluded to. But it's like he needed something to really grasp and pin that legendary status on, and this is it. You know, he's leading his team to, you know, a second Copa del Rey in 6 years, but also then the consequence of them winning this trophy, despite the fact that they finished 15th, sorry, they're into the UEFA Cup the next season after as well. So, you know, European football, and it allows Espanyol, who are, you know, never a club that go and splash loads of cash, but it probably actually meant that they could keep the nucleus of the squad and go and, you know, enhance it ever so slightly for a European campaign as well. You know, and this is the UEFA Cup, when the UEFA Cup was, you know, really good. You know, some of the teams that, you know, were winning this, you know, in fact, that same year as well was the first time that Sevilla won the UEFA Cup, before they went on and won it like, what, 7 or 8 times now they've won it, haven't they? But again, this was a proper contest, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely was. And it's a good game to watch. But the game's available in its entirety on YouTube. Actually, I'd recommend, if anyone's at a loose end, stick it on, because it's an entertaining match. And the fluidity in the way that Espanyol play, and I've mentioned obviously the 3 or 4 key players that they had running the show for them, but even with the scoreline and how pegged back Zaragoza were, there was individual moments in there, as you'd expect from some of the big names in their squad, but it was just, they were absolutely outplayed on the day, and it's rightly remembered by Espanyol fans as being, you know, one of the highs, because obviously they've not really had much to celebrate in the 19 or so years since, but it was by no means a fluke, and you'd say, as we've talked about already, not just because of the tough run that Zaragoza had and the sides that they overcome to get to the final. You'd say on paper, probably on balance, that there's maybe room to argue that Zaragoza were probably the favourites out of the 2, and Espanyol were the ever so slight underdogs going into this, maybe.
I'd certainly read it that way, yeah, definitely. Because Again, not just because of the the fact that they were obviously more consistent in the build up to the final. Real Zaragoza obviously had the more exciting, as I've mentioned, rollercoaster way. But like I say, this wasn't a good season for Espanyol overall. The Copa del Rey final is the sort of cherry on the cake for it, and the reward that they get from getting there is absolutely incredible. And the reward, the fact that he had this, and I suppose this is maybe another podcast in itself, is that the reward for winning this Copa del Rey final is that UEFA Cup run that they go on to, where they reach the UEFA Cup final, and they lose out to Seville, who will go on to retain it, and you get this all Spanish UEFA Cup final. Again, this is the peak for Espanyol, isn't it? Really, in terms of their successes and things like that. To get to these back-to-back finals is brilliant for them. But they're so unassuming that you would never expect to see this in their very recent history, would you?
No, yeah, I think that's right, and I suppose as well, if you think back to it, so yeah, you've rightly pointed out that the inconsistency that we spoke of at the start of the podcast, particularly in the league campaign, and the troubles that were sort of brewing over underneath the surface for Espanyol during the league campaign, and this win has a. I'm not saying it cured everything, but it seemed to have a real turnaround for the club, because obviously the next campaign they have that great run, as you've mentioned, in your opinion. But it's this game is quite pivotal to changing the mindset of the club and the atmosphere around it. I think it's fair to say that when you scrape into 15th and it is such a, I think it's only by a matter of 1 or 2 points. The winning the Copa del Rey gives the fans a bit of hope, but something to unite behind. Just going to the final is it's something to bring them together, and then obviously to lift it. It gives them the opportunity to have a moment of celebration after during what is a difficult campaign. And it was nice that it's nice to see players like Raul Tamudo, even De La Pena. And we've not mentioned really Daniel Harke as well, who are Espanyol legends, really. They represented the club well on off the pitch, but it was a moment of glory for them to save it. And I think it's Espanyol's first major trophy for 5 or 6 years at the time, I think, isn't it? And it's the fourth Copa del Rey in the club's history, and like I said, they've not really had much to celebrate since.
It puts them back in consciousness, doesn't it? Like you say, they're probably a team that churned through results, and especially at a time when we're seeing, Deportivo de La Coruña having some consistency. We're seeing Valencia be a bit of a force. You look at the successes of, Alaves, earlier on in the century, getting to UEFA Cup finals and things like that. It brought Espanyol out of sort of like, not entirely out of Barcelona's shadow, but put them back on a certain level with them, that where everyone was saying, actually, football in Barcelona isn't just about, Rijkaard and Pep and Messi and Ronaldinho. There's also this other club here as well who are doing remarkable things and winning trophies and silverware and competing in Europe and things like that. And I think that's where you get that affinity with clubs like that. It was probably the same last night with watching Real Betis. I'll put my card on the table and say I was very much shouting for Real Betis to win that night, mainly for Manuel Pellegrini and Isco from that perspective. But like it shows where they're competing against. And we put a tweet out to say, like, Betis's side are worth something like 186 million euros in total. The Chelsea squad is worth over $1 billion. It's different levels, and it's great to see those stories of those clubs being successful when the system doesn't really necessarily want them to be successful, is probably what I'm trying to say. So it's a real, this era really genuinely demonstrates that for me. The fact that you don't have these top 3 sides that we have now in Spain dominating the Copa del Rey during this 10 years, and seeing the likes of Espanyol, Deportivo La Coruña, Mallorca, Real Betis, Sevilla, or winning the competition, emphatically as well. Playing it in stadiums like the Vicente Calderón, the Martínez Valero down at Elche, the Mestalla, the Estadio Olímpico in Seville. Do you know what I mean? It's not the anaesthetized version of the Copa del Rey we've got now. So I think that's why we definitely want to focus on it, don't we?
Oh yeah, I mean we started off at the beginning saying like back when football was better, but the on and off the pitch, I think it's right, and the Copa del Rey exemplifies that because this particular win for Espanyol, but also the various winners over the course of we said a decade, didn't we, at the start? It shows that there was still that it was still a competition that was won on merit. In this particular final, Espanyol rose to the occasion. They showed a bit of resilience in terms of getting there, and in a difficult run with not the greatest season, they showed resilience in reaching it and persevering against a very tough opposition. It is won on merit. It's hard won. It's hard earned. And I think that's we are talking about a period of time where football still had that. It had that. It was a bit more pure than it is now, and it's great to see. It means that all the clubs that we will eventually talk about when we do more episodes like this, we're talking about a moment in time that they still to this day hold dearly, and that has has a real moment of significance in their histories. And this is something that we like to tap into, don't we? On this podcast, we are unashamedly nostalgia merchants, but there's a very good reason why we like it. It's because
there's so much better.
Yeah, and there's great stories to each of it, but I'd say that about Spanish football in general. I think Spain is very rich as a nation culturally in general, but football is a very good vehicle of being able to exemplify that, because it's every club in Spain's got its own unique identity and history, and it's a full tapestry of things that go to it. We can talk one day about Athletic Club and everything it means to them as an identity, to be Basque and to be proud of it. And La Real's the same, Real Sociedad, they are proud Basque, but in a different way.
Probably not too dissimilar for Espanyol, though, in terms of their Catalonian identity compared to what you'd find with Barcelona as well. And for me especially at the minute, looking at how we're seeing this re-emergence in Barcelona, football in Barcelona, not just with those two big clubs. It's very interesting times there for people to have such a plethora of choice of clubs to follow if they want to. But certainly from an Espanyol perspective, they're always going to be there as one of Spain's oldest clubs. A real success story. For their own people, probably more than anything that way around as well. So
yeah,
I think they are deeply proud to be that Barcelona club for Barcelona people as well. You're not going to find too many people from outside of the city, wearing an Espanyol shirt, for example. But I think they revel in that pride. They don't need the glamour of their near city rivals to be competitive and to be successful. And I think they revel in that, and I find that quite charming as well. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's definitely something we need to keep pulling on the threads of when we look at some of these teams during this period of time when there are glory days. Like I say, we can look at things in isolation, like Girona qualifying for the Champions League last season, but things like that happen in Spain in isolation now, whereas stuff like this was more of a regular occurrence, and they did have, as I mentioned at the top of this podcast, players were more evenly spread with household names. You would recognize names in those teams, whereas now, I think you would struggle.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there. I mean, look at how this season alone, obviously we'll say this because we're both people who are residing in England, but this year you've seen Palace, Liverpool, and Newcastle win the domestic trophies in English football, and everybody's like, saying, "Oh, isn't it great to have different winners?" Well, in the early 2000s or late 90s in Spain, you had a different winner of the Copa del Rey virtually every year, and it was because
Yeah.
it was done, it was on merit. It was, Zaragoza was like, and it's just unfortunate for them really that they ran out of steam in the final, given the run they had to get there. But it's not like it, we covered some of the players that featured in those games for Real Madrid and for Barcelona. And it wasn't like, now where, I don't know, a team might put out second string players because it's the Copa and they're focusing solely on staying in La Liga or trying to get a Europa Conference League or league position. They were going for it. It was a trophy to be won, and some teams were better than others, and that's
Yeah.
the beauty of knockout football, And it was
Oh,
it was a golden era for it, really.
it really was, and I'll probably end on this sentence to say it was qualification for Europe on merit. You'd won a trophy and you were into the hat. Not this now, where I think even in La Liga, down to I think it was
Eighth.
Real Vallecano, which again I'm mightily impressed with Real Vallecano to qualify for Europe. But when you're finishing 8th, is that really the same as like say winning a Copa del Rey? Look at Super League by stealth, Paul. That's what I'm going to say, and that's how I'm going to end this podcast and start this protest movement that we're working on. But yeah, absolutely delightful to talk about this final because I think it is definitely one of the more interesting finals from this period of really interesting finals as well. That run from Real Zaragoza to fall at the final hurdle is obviously a shame, but again, really exciting. And then Espanyol getting the knock-on effect from winning this competition was, vital for them. It probably gave them longevity in La Liga. I think Real Zaragoza were relegated a couple of seasons after this as well. With the likes of Pablo Aimar and co in their squad. So, yeah, and they've never really bounced back since, unfortunately. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Paul, to talk about this one with you again. We'll be back next week to discuss another bit of football nostalgia. But we were saying at the beginning of the show, we'd quite like some, direction as well for anyone who's listened. So if you do want a particular subject that you'd like us to talk about, or you think you want to put a light on a certain historical event in Spanish football that you think is worth mentioning, they can reach out to us, can't they, Paul?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is one of those podcasts where we can talk about anything we want, really. And if you feel that your club has a moment in time that is overlooked or underappreciated, let us know, and we'll be happy to do a deep dive on it and make you feel appreciated. Otherwise, if you don't, we'll just carry on picking topics that we enjoy, and you'll just have to listen to that.
We will. Jeremy Tulalan in Malaga is high up on my list of people to talk about. But yeah, we'd always appreciate any feedback and anything that you guys want to hear as well, where we can spend our week going and doing all the research and bringing you a brilliant podcast as per usual. But I'll end on that lovely note, Paul. Thank you very much for joining me on this evening again. Always a delight to talk to you about Spanish football.
Absolutely, Nick. It always is. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And thank you again to the listeners for sticking with us at home. And if you want to know more about any kind of nostalgic Spanish football, go follow us on social medias at El Partido on X and Instagram. And yes, we'll see you next time. So we'll catch you then. Hasta luego.